On today's show, I'm going to tell you why all of the Apple blogs are wrong, but Luke Miani knows what he's talking about. I'm iCavDave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring my notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. And in today's show, I had a whole bunch of topics to talk about, and then I looked at the questions you guys have asked, and you've asked pretty much all of the topics I wanted to talk about, so we're going to make it iCave Answers special, starting off with this.
Marcin Kowalczyk at iCave David Eden-Sangwell asks, iCave Answers, could you comment on the roumors of imminent M2 production? Is M2 equals M1X? A herald of more Macs soon? May WWDC.
So, as soon as I saw this news about M2 going into production, my alarm bell started to go off immediately, to be completely honest, and I'm pretty confident that that's not the case. That's not what's happening. And this is what Luke Miani was saying on his video as well. All of these articles have come out. They've said that the next generation of Apple Silicon chips is going to be ready for July, and that doesn't make sense for M2 at all. This is almost certainly going to be M1X. Now, I don't agree with some of the other stuff that Luke said about the potential for M series chips only getting updated every 2 years. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I still think that we're going to get those every year. This information has all come out from an article in Nikkei Asia, which basically states that the next generation of Apple Silicon chips are going into production at TSMC. And the big problem here is that they've assumed that the next generation is M2, whereas I don't think that's exactly what they mean when they've written this headline. I think they mean the successor, the next chip in the Apple Silicon lineup, and that would be M1X. Now, I've explained in a few videos the kind of differences, but very, very quickly, A14, which is in your iPhone, has 4 efficiency and 2 powerful chips. Apple's processors have what's called a big little or little big architecture, which means they've got a mixture of efficiency and performance cores, and the iPhone, the A14, has 4 efficiency cores with 2 performance cores and then 4 graphics cores. To turn that into what would have been the A14X but is now the M1, you basically take the same chip, but you put in 4 efficiency cores as normal, and you double your performance cores up to 4, so you've got 4 of each, so it's a 4 and 4, and then you've got an 8-core GPU. Now, what we're expecting to come for the M1X is going to be getting 8 performance cores, 4 efficiency cores, and a 16-core GPU. That's what we're expecting for the M1X. Whether that's exactly what we get or not, we don't know, but that is kind of what everyone's kind of accepted is going to be the new architecture. And once we get up to M2, it's important to note that M2 is going to go back down to the architecture of M1 of 4 and 4, but each of those cores is going to be about 25% faster than it was previously, because that's pretty much what Apple does every time that they update the A-series chips. Apple gets between 20 and 25% more performance each year when they update their cores. So that's what is expected to happen with the M2 chips as well, that you will go to the next A15 cores in these. And we have heard that Avalanche is going to be the name for the big cores. We haven't yet seen any indication of what the efficiency cores are going to be called, but answers down in the comments. Now, if these chips are going to be ready for shipping in July, that kind of puts a little knock on my theory of having a May event, but it doesn't rule it out completely. They could be announced and not available to order immediately. But I think we will get the announcement, at least for the May event, before the iMacs that we've got out there already ship. But WWDC makes more sense. 7th of June for the event. Talk about the new stuff. Then say you can order them, not this Friday, but the Friday after. And then 2 weeks later they ship. So it's kind of like what's going on with the iMacs at the moment, where they are going on pre-order this Friday on the 30th. And you can buy them from the middle of May. So, great question. As I say, I don't think that the news outlets have got this right. I think it is M1X that's going into production.
The Duke of Kidderminster asks, iCave Answers, do you think there will be a May event?
I feel like I've just covered that, so just up there.
Arthur Swart asks, iCave Answers, do you think ARMv8 M1 buyers will risk ending up with a less functional device once ARMv9 M2 SOCs are the norm? ARMv8 is 10 years old and it has just been replaced. It reminds me of the first G4 Mini that became obsolete about a year later when Apple switched to Intel.
So, good question, but it's important to note here as well that Apple doesn't just use ARMv8 as it comes. They have a lot of their own stuff built into it, and also, from what Rene Ritchie has been saying, they have already implemented quite a lot of the ARMv9 architecture. It's just that the v9 architecture is now going to be rolled out to ARM's own core designs, so people like Qualcomm and a few of the others will take ARM's core designs, the Cortex designs, and assemble them into their own SOCs, whereas Apple designs their own cores from scratch. So this is actually not going to make as much difference to Apple, but there is definitely going to be certain parts of that can be added in. Is it going to make a huge difference in terms of performance? Probably not for Apple, because Apple aren't just going up from V8 to V9. There have been points as well. I think they were on 8.4 by the time V9 was released. So much of this stuff is coming through already, and Apple has been using a lot of the stuff themselves already. So don't worry about the M1s becoming obsolete. I don't think there's too much risk of that happening.
Arthur Swart 10 hours ago asks, iCave answers, do you think there is a future for tech channels that focus on gaming at Intel? When is this so far ahead in its first iteration? Do you think Apple gaming is about to happen? When the first and worst is SoC offers 1050-ish graphics, the next version should catch up fairly rapidly with 1080/2060 levels of performance. With GPU prices being where they are, buying an AS M1 or better for gaming might be an option. That could be the de facto end of channels that build systems of ever better, more expensive, and virtually unavailable components.
Now, you have to remember and put everything here in context that right now is a very strange time for people that are trying to build systems, because with the pandemic and everything else that's been going on, there has been increased demand for computers, and part of that issue is because people are working from home, and a lot of people need to have a new computer. Now, a lot of those people who are going to build a new computer have decided then, I might as well make it also game, or I might as well make it also capable of doing video editing, or also doing stuff that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So that has contributed to this silicon shortage. Now, the silicon shortage is not because the world is running out of sand, it's because the demand is outstripping what can be made at the moment. Now, Apple has done well because they've reserved huge amounts of capacity at TSMC and other and their other sort of suppliers that aren't necessarily for silicon, but for just product parts in general. So Apple are not really affected by the silicon shortage in the same way as most of the other companies. However, the fact that people can't get their hands on these parts, these gaming graphics cards and things like that, is also affected by the fact that cryptocurrencies have just gone up massively in value, so that it becomes very, very attractive to buy up all of those high-end graphics cards in order to mine more crypto, because the crypto itself is very expensive at the moment, and if you're mining it yourself, the mining cost isn't affected by the price of crypto, it's affected by how much crypto there is. And the more crypto that there is out there already, the more expensive it becomes to mine, because the maths becomes more difficult, as far as I understand it. In terms of Apple getting into gaming, I've said this in the past, I'll say it again, it's not Apple's issue. It comes down to the games developers to actually develop for the platform that Apple has. Now, as the Apple platform becomes more powerful, as we get into M1X and further down the line, it will definitely start to make sense for these developers to come across. Now, one of the other things that makes Apple Silicon very attractive, I would guess, for developers to develop for, is although it's a small market, at the moment, Apple Silicon has already overtaken Intel Macs in terms of sales, which makes all the sense in the world. When developers do bring stuff over to Apple Silicon and the Mac, right now they only have to optimize it for literally one chip. Even down the line, though, once we get to more powerful chips, it's probably going to be between 2 and 3 processors per year that will all, again, work on the same architecture, but you'll just need to be able to scale your system within that. I think it is actually going to be quite an attractive platform for game developers if they want to develop something that's very optimized for the hardware, which has always been what Apple does well, is optimizing the stuff that they're putting out for the hardware that they use. And now that they're moving away from Intel, and they're not going to have like 6 or 7 different MacBook Pro processors and 4 or 5 graphics cards, and then you get your iMac, and then you get your... it's going to make it much easier for anyone to develop something that runs better on this hardware than it does on the other stuff, and it's for exactly the same reason that Android is less optimized, because it has to run on so many different pieces of physical hardware that you can't integrate the software so well with the hardware. Apple's always done well because they make both the software and the hardware, and nobody else can run their software, so they don't have to put anything in it that's not required for the physical hardware that they make themselves. And yes, absolutely, the power as it goes up with Apple Silicon is going to attract more game studios over to the light side.
Joe, 8 hours ago asks, iCave answers, what was your least most favorite virtual event? WWDC and Spring Loaded for me. The worst event was the Time Flies one back in September.
So it's tricky when we've got so few events to actually look back on. I think this last event, Spring Loaded, was just astonishing, like how much they managed to pack into it. I would have preferred if they'd spent a bit more time on iMacs and maybe brought us an iMac Pro as well, and a little bit less on the iPad, because I wasn't as excited about the iPad. Everyone was just shocked that they put an M1 in it, but the M1 is a 14X, so it doesn't really make any difference. So yeah, Spring Loaded is my favourite, and also probably the Apple Silicon event from the end of last year. Least exciting was probably the iPhone one, because we just kind of knew everything that was coming out at that point for the iPhone. We knew everything. There was no surprises at all.
Joe, 8 hours ago asks, iCave answers, should the Apple TV HD still be for sale? The set-top box price, and there, in my opinion, cheaper options for a much more reasonable price.
Right, there's no reason that the Apple TV HD shouldn't be there still. It would have been nice if it had got a little processor bump, but actually when you look at the Apple TV 4K, I actually think the reason that they've stopped making the one that they had before and moved on to this current one is not because they needed more power, but because they wanted to use an SoC that they're making for other stuff as well. Because it was originally using an A10X, which is an iPad chip, and they've moved it to using an A12 nothing, so it isn't an X chip anymore. So actually the performance is about the same than it was in the previous version, but they are now using a chip that they're also using in the base level iPad, the iPad mini, iPhone XR, I want to say, and it's used in a few products, so they've got enough scale to keep making them. I think they basically ran out of A10X chips and went, we could use an A12 and it will give us about the same performance, and they went, yes, that's fine then. The A8, however, that is in the Apple TV HD box, probably is getting a bit long in the tooth. I'm not quite sure why we still have it. Maybe they've just got a load sitting on the shelf right now. Now, what problems do I have with it? It's too expensive. That is the biggest issue with it. It is very expensive for something that is using a very old processor from, what are we talking here? We're talking iPhone 6. So, yeah, it's an old system, but it does work. I think they should bring it down to maybe $75 or $79 instead of being $150. That would just open it up to a huge number more people, but maybe they just literally don't have the stock to do that, and when it's gone, it's gone. The 4K one, though, also probably too expensive for what it actually is, although I do definitely want to check out the new remotes.
Eliezer Aquino, 8 hours ago asks, iCave answers, don't you think that Samsung might buy the information? Referring to the hack.
So yeah, obviously in yesterday's show we were talking a lot about the hack of quantum computers and the information that was stolen, and then this hacking group tried to extort Apple for some money. Whether Samsung would want to buy it, probably not. I think they are happy enough to get on with what they're doing on their own, making slightly more expensive AirTags than Apple. I'm not certain that it would be worth $50 million to them, but we also don't know what was in that hack. And here's the issue. When you don't know what was in there, it's very difficult to put a price on it. Any group that's trying to negotiate a price for it is not going to tell you what's in it, because then you know what's in it. And then you don't need to buy it. So I would say no, Samsung probably doesn't want to. It would probably be illegal for them to buy it. Whether it's handling stolen goods or whatever it comes down to. But yeah, I just don't see that the other companies would be that bothered to do it, but they were probably quite interested in what's inside.
Mac Daddy asks, iCave answers, I'm an over-the-road driver and live in my truck 26 days a month. I seem to be collecting more and more HomeKit items. Lighting strip, HomePod. Maybe a camera soon, etc. in my truck, so I'm looking to complete my system since HomeKit needs a better Wi-Fi network than my little hotspot is my slowest speed. Looking at adding a real Apple-oriented router so that I can bounce from hotspot to iPhone to iPad cellular options without disrupting my HomeKit. I haven't been looking at routers for a few years, so what new options and feature do I need to look for to add to my little mobile Apple walled garden?
So it's cool to hear that you are kind of pimping out your cab with all this HomeKit stuff. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the best solution is for you, because really I'm not 100% sure if you can bounce a hotspot onto a router to bounce it out again, but I could be wrong on that. In terms of good routers for HomeKit in general, I use the Eero router, which is one of Amazon's. It's HomeKit certified. It's listed on Apple's website for that reason. They do a mesh version. Pretty sure you're not going to need a mesh in a truck, but it's about $100, I think, and it's really, really good. The app for it is great. It tells you when anything joins your network, it tells you when you've got issues with your network and helps you to diagnose them, and it lets you run guest networks, all that kind of stuff, but it also works specifically with HomeKit, so that would probably be a decent idea if you know how to get that hotspot into a router, which might be through a USB cable. That might be the easiest way, but I can't guarantee that because I've never tried it.
Team Kinetics 7 hours ago asks, iCave answers, there's a lot of speculation about the next version of iPadOS being more professional to make the iPad Pro more of a legitimate pro machine. How quickly do you think this will roll out? I don't expect a huge update at WWDC 2021. I think it might take a few years before iPadOS is comparable to macOS.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question, and I get asked it a lot, is when will they make iPadOS up to macOS standards, but nobody tells me what that means. Like, what is it that is missing from macOS? What is it that's missing from iPadOS that would make it as good as a Mac for you? If you want it to be used in the same way as a Mac and be macOS, then that's more of a workflow thing than a feature. Like, what is it about the way that iPadOS works that means that it's not as powerful for you guys? Now, I don't see it ever getting like movable windows. You've got the split screen where you can put two apps side by side. You can roll over another app if you need to, so you can have something else on that. I don't understand what people mean when they say that iPadOS needs to be comparable to macOS. Like, it is. It's just a different way of working. Most of the time, people actually mean it hasn't got the apps that I want. But again, that comes down to app developers in most cases and not Apple, because all of the frameworks are there for people to make whatever apps they want. If you're wanting the Apple Pro apps, you haven't got too long to wait, because pretty sure they will be coming out at WWDC, at least for developers to have a look at. But whether they actually get announced on stage or not, or whether they get released to the public immediately, I don't know. That could well be waiting until September, when they have their regular kind of, here is the new version of iPadOS and it's ready to go. Please do let me know in the comments, guys, what is your big issue with iPadOS and using that as a main system. What is it that iPadOS specifically is missing versus the Mac?
Undercover Doc 5 hours ago asks, iCave answers, do you think we'll see a Mac Mini with M1X whenever they release? Notification Squad Team Kinetics.
Yep. Next. I mean, I know that's a super quick answer and it's not a lot of detail, but here's the kind of thinking behind it. When you look on Apple's website, if you look at the 13-inch MacBook Pro, you will see that there are still a couple of Intel models left. That means that Apple has probably got something of that kind of size range that is coming in to replace those Intel models. And if you go to the Mac Mini, you've got your two M1 models at the beginning, and then there's an Intel model, which is the highest price one, the 1099 version, and it's quite possible that that is being left there because that will be replaced with an M1X version. We do still have a 21.5-inch iMac as well on the website, which presumably means there is another version of the smaller iMac, the 24-inch iMac, on the way. That could well be M1X2. And all of the 27-inch iMacs are still there, and the Mac Pro is still there. But if you look at MacBook Air, there's nothing but M1 anymore. So that suggests to me that this is just the version of the MacBook Air that we're getting. There aren't any more versions to wait for until it gets its next generation chip, which will be M2, which I think is probably towards the end of this year too. So I think we've covered everything there. If you've got a question that you would like answering on the show, hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comments with your question. And the other thing you can post up down there is if you have joined the notification squad by ringing the bell when you subscribe to the channel, and then you will get a shout out like Team Kinetics. So thank you for joining the notification squad. As I say, I would love to answer your questions, so post them up down in the comments section, and make sure you ring the bell so that you don't miss the answer. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.